Hello. Welcome to the Weather Skool podcast, where we dive into the world of meteorology, but with a twist. This isn't just about weather forecasts and storm tracking. We're here to hear the stories behind the meteorologists themselves. You'll get to know the people who bring you the weather every day, what drives them, what challenges they've faced, and how their personal journeys shape the work they do. If you're passionate about weather or curious about the lives of those who predict it, you're in the right place. So jump in as we explore the people behind the forecasts and discover what makes meteorologists truly unique. Welcome to Weather Skool, and this is the Weather Skool Podcast Project.
Hi, it's Justin Kiefer with the Weather Skool Podcast Project, and I am honored to have as a guest Alan Seals. Alan is a career meteorologist and a wonderful old friend of mine who works along the Gulf Coast and is currently, if I still recall, in the Mobile, Alabama area.
Correct.
And so I'm going to go over a couple of points with Alan. Oh, and if you're interested, the podcast project, we are talking with meteorologists, broadcast meteorologists from across the country, and find out about their stories, get their stories in their words on what it was like becoming a meteorologist, becoming a broadcast meteorologist, how that career arc has gone on over the years, and what it led to, challenges, what was fun, what was not fun, those kind of things. And that's the conversation we have within the podcast project. And so, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And I've got a list here because I don't know if I could remember all the bullet points about. So I'll just have a few of these. Emmy Award winning, an AMS fellow. We'll get into that. You were the president of the National Weather Association.
Right.
You have been an adjunct professor, an author, as well as a career in broadcast meteorology. And I'm sure I'm leaving a few things out there.
But the yard man. I cut the grass too.
Well, there. See. I'm gonna write that down. And that's just a few of the things. And I don't want to minimize those points, but any one of those, in my estimation, would be a career achievement. And you've got a list of 5 or 6 or 10 career achievements as a broadcast meteorologist. So first of all, congratulations. And then secondly, let's talk a little bit about that. Emmy Awards. Well, I'm going to start right there. Do you know off the top of your head or just how many you have won over the years?
The count is 16. And actually, so I retired from TV earlier this year in January. I was nominated this month for 2 more. So I'll find out in a couple of months if I win another one.
So 16 Emmys.
Yeah.
Getting one is a career achievement. And I don't want to miss that point. That is simply amazing and a testament to you and your work and your integrity of what you are and bring to the television industry. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So you retired earlier in the year, but that hasn't slowed you down.
No.
So we'll come back to it a little bit later. But what are you doing right now?
So right now, I phrase it as early semi-retirement. So I'm no longer on TV. I am still teaching at the University of South Alabama, only in the spring. It's Intro to TV Weather Broadcasting, which this spring will be my 25th year at the University of South Alabama. I'm writing a weather column for the local newspaper, which is every other week. Just before I retired, I completed several books. One is a photography book. It's been my weather hobby. It's been my hobby since 5th grade. And then a book on my career and careers in TV weather. And then another book that's sort of like weather from A to Z. So got those done. As we speak, I'm in the running for president of the American Meteorological Society. So we'll find out also in a few weeks if I am successful there. So it's not retirement. My wife teases me all the time. It's just a shift and where my focus is. And then I'm doing still a lot more speaking, whether it's speaking at colleges or speaking at high schools or middle schools. And then the last thing, which I always, the weather consulting and expert witness work, which is really fun, fun.
I've done a little bit of that in the past, especially working on legal cases where
Hmm.
there's weather involved and an accident or things like that. That is a, and you can dig into the details of the meteorology of that. That's a it's an interesting sort of, I wouldn't even call it a tangent. It's just a great place to kind of
Right.
use your experience for sure.
That's right. And it all, so much of what I've done and where I've been has been from people coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Or, "Hey, you'd be good at this." Or "Did you ever think about doing this?" So that's another one of those things where attorneys started calling me out of the blue and saying, "You're a good communicator and you have a good reputation. I think you'd do well if you had to testify in court."
Yeah, from my experience, most of the times when you present the evidence, then there's usually a settlement.
That's right.
um, so you had mentioned one thing about your passion for weather photography
Mhm.
since you were 5 years old. So let's talk a little bit about growing up and where you grew up, what
Mhm.
your early childhood was like. Everybody seems to have a little fascinating similar story who are in television meteorology. So take
Right.
us back to a young Alan. Where'd you grow up? How did things go back in those days?
Yeah, I had an awesome childhood. I still do. I always try to stay young at heart and remember the basics of all the things we were taught as little kids. I grew up outside of New York City in Mount Vernon, New York, which is a suburb. It's on the border of the Bronx. Awesome place to grow up because you are right on the edge of the biggest city in the country, but then you are also on the edge of suburbia. So you could literally walk to the subway and go anywhere in New York, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan, or you could go a little farther north and you could see farmland and just rolling hills. So went to public school growing up. I was or am the youngest of four sons. So I
Hmm.
was the little brother, and my big brothers always looked out for me, and they still do. Um, all of us were involved in scouting. We were involved in the church. We were involved in, we were all paper boys. We had our newspaper routes for many years. So that put me outside literally 7 days a week. And I was a paper boy from fifth grade through high school. So it was really cool to be a young entrepreneur. I didn't think of it that way at that time, but that's what I was. Learning how to deal with people, how to deal with money,
Yeah.
literally learning how to escape an angry dog, even when there's ice on the ground. So you learn a lot about life just by being out and doing things.
Yeah.
In third grade, I started playing trumpet. And simply the only reason I started playing is my best friend, Richard Greenwald. He one day went to take up trumpet lessons at school. And I said, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to go learn how to play the trumpet." So I said, "Okay, I'll go." And I started playing, and he gave it up. I kept on going. And I played trumpet all the way through high school. So my first career choice was actually a professional musician.
Yeah.
I really loved music. I loved performing in a band. I was a good team musician, as in I could write. I wrote a couple of songs that the high school band played. I was in the concert choir, the marching band, the jazz band. But there was one problem that prevented me from becoming a professional musician, and it was I was a horrible trumpet player. So, as good as I was at music, I was not a good performer. And I knew that, even though it was fun. And along the way, I started developing a simmering interest in weather,
Yeah.
even though the other career choice was professional baseball. But like most young men, I realized I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But for me, my weather story, unlike a lot of people where there was one big event that got their interest sparked, for me, it was a lot of little simmering events, starting with seeing thunder snow or hearing thunder snow when I was in probably first or second grade. And it
Wow.
just amazed me, it scared me, and it always just kind of stayed in the background.
Yeah.
By third grade, we had a teacher, Miss Costello, and she took us outside. We laid in the grass, we looked up at the clouds, and we were trying to imagine what shapes, what animals we were seeing in the clouds. And while we were doing that in third grade, I'm thinking, those clouds are made of water. How is it possible they could float? And that's another thing that stuck with me all the way into middle school until I took earth science. And we learned about the periodic table of the elements and learned about the weight of a hydrogen molecule, an oxygen molecule, a nitrogen molecule. And then it started making sense, even though it's still, to me, to this day, it's bizarre that clouds float. They can dump inches of rain over your house and then 3 hours later, there's no sign that that cloud ever existed. So those stuck with me. Growing up with the sort of musical background, and I guess my personality, I was always a natural ham, a natural performer, but I never really thought of performing as a career until I got into high school, and I saw that combination of meteorology, science, and performing, and I call myself a performing scientist, a weather performer. And I realized that it's a job where most people can't do it. Most people won't do it. It's fascinating. Relatively speaking, it pays well. And I said, okay, this could be something good. And from that point, I targeted broadcast meteorology.
That is inspiring. And I want to just share a couple of similarities here.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in those rolling hills in southern New York as a kid, the
Yeah.
youngest of a bunch of brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Played the trumpet in middle school.
Okay.
Professional baseball career ended right after graduation. Um, pretty interesting similarities. It didn't have a paper route, though. Now that I think about it, my brothers did, but I didn't have one.
Okay.
But still, that's kind of and so we have an idea for you. You're in high school. This is kind of piquing your interest, and I know that you graduated. Your undergraduate degree was at Cornell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually just there this week. I'm on the advisory council for the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department, which is fun. We just kind of help the department chair guide the program and so forth. But boy, Cornell, small meteorology program, big school, but for me, it was big fun. It was the most fun I ever had in my life into my 20s. It was just an awesome experience of learning and growing, learning really more about myself than I learned about the science. And my grades reflected that. They started out strong, but they declined because I was having too much fun. But along the way, in college, I was a DJ, both a mobile disc jockey and a radio disc jockey. So I went to almost all the parties, whether I was throwing the party or just there as a attendee. But that was everything I did as in my undergrad was about learning how to communicate. And so I majored in meteorology, minored in communications. And I learned as a DJ, it took me a while to learn that you're kind of controlling the audience's mood with what you're playing and the sequence of what you're playing. And you have to read your audience. You can't just play what you want to play. You have to play what they want to play. So basic communication came into play there. And it was also, I guess, so one of the cool things, a bunch of cool things. I was an RA, resident hall advisor, for several years, which was fun. And from there, I learned a bit more on how to deal with people because you're managing people's personalities and their misdeeds, and you're also trying to keep the peace. In my end of the junior year, I was lucky enough to be selected for an internship at the Weather Channel in Atlanta. And this was the mid 1980s. So they were, I guess at the time, 8, 9, 10 years old. And it was so awesome to actually realize that everything I was learning in school had a practical application. That's unfortunately one of the downsides of our educational system is you learn a lot of theory, you learn a lot of equations, but you don't see where it applies until you get out into the real world. Yeah. So that also convinced me that I wanted to do TV weather. After Cornell, I applied for jobs. I applied for grad school. I didn't get a job, but I did get accepted to grad school. And that's how I got to Florida State. FSU offered me a teaching assistantship. And I'd never really thought of teaching, but then I realized teaching is what broadcast meteorologists do. You get up, you give a 3-minute lesson. There's no homework other than be safe. And I really enjoyed teaching meteorology at FSU. So that enabled me to get through the program, paid my tuition and housing. And along the way, as you'll recall, we had a nice growing broadcast meteorology department in the very basic stages.
Yeah. That is the time frame where you and I met
Right.
while you were in the getting your graduate degree, and I was stumbling my way through a undergraduate. But the thing that I loved about all of it was that weathercasting class, the
Yeah.
broadcast meteorology, and our old friend Dr. Alquist, who could just get a sense of okay, here's what you're doing. Let's do it this way. Let's talk, just had a good sense of how to sort of massage you through the very beginning. And we had some basic technology back in those days. That was one of the amazing things about where we started to where things got to in regard to technology.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I kind of heard in your education story is you were willing to take on other things like DJ or RA,
Mm-hmm.
or obviously an internship's an important thing, but also paper route and trumpet. There's, and I think that's lost on is like, do as much as you can, right?
Right. That's right. And especially more so than ever, younger people have to learn how to be social. Obviously, we went through a pandemic, and that really changed the world in how we communicate and interact with each other. And the technology of communications, which is basically smartphones and apps and online communication, really, as a society, we've lost that skill of verbal communication, eye to eye communication, empathy,
Right.
just all of those things that are so critical still in most jobs. Even though a lot of jobs and careers are technical and digital, you still, at the end of the day, you have to deal with people as a person.
Amazing points. And as you finished your sort of graduate degree at Florida State, and obviously there was a teaching potential beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
but television was also there as a career path.
Yeah.
And so take, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
sort of connect the dots, your career arc for where it started and how those jobs came about for you,
Okay. Yeah.
if you could.
Oh, definitely. Yep. It's as I said, I had a great career, both in terms of timing, opportunity, eventually salary, but more so satisfaction. So literally maybe 3 days after I graduated FSU, I didn't have a job, and I took a trip up the East Coast to go back and visit family. And along the way, when I was visiting my parents, uh, it was Dr. Alquist who called my parents home. This was back in the day where you had landlines and
No
you had
texting.
paper maps when you were traveling across the country. But he called and said, there's a station in Albany, Georgia, Albany, as they pronounce it in South Georgia, that's interested in you. And I was just so excited to have graduated. I said to him, well, I have a demonstration demo tape in my desk and a resume. Would you send that to them? And he did, which was really great. He sent it to them. I got up to New York to visit family. And on the way back, the station, I guess, had called my parents home again because there were no cell phones. And when I stopped, they said, okay, we have you set up for an interview next week. So I went to WALB TV in Albany, Georgia, where our classmate Terry Smith was working. She was a meteorologist there at the time, and she'd put in a good word for me. And I interviewed, took the drug test, and the next week I was on TV, my first job. So literally 2 weeks from graduation, I was on TV in my first job.
Wow.
Albany was great, good people, good learning experience, good coworkers. I was weekend meteorologist, and during the week I was a video editor, and that's where my photography hobby came into play. I was a video editor and I was a video photographer.
Wow.
So having used still photos and taken pictures for most of my life at that point, it was an easy transition to get into the video. So I did that 3 days a week, and then I was a meteorologist 2 days a week and filled in some, but I
Right.
wasn't satisfied because I wanted to be a full-time meteorologist. So I was in Albany and made great friends. My starting salary, this was 1987 with a master's degree, my starting salary was $14,000 a year.
Yeah.
Now, even aside from inflation, to put it in perspective, that was half of what a typical master's degree student made on their first job. So
Yeah.
that's the real big downside of broadcast meteorology, which it's a little better, but in general, you start really low salary in a small community and you have to earn your stripes, you have to prove yourself, you have to work your way up, you have to work the shift that no one else wants to work, fill in for other people, work long days, long nights. But I loved what I did, and
Yeah.
I still do. So it wasn't hard. I got that job because there was a magazine called Broadcasting and Cable magazine. And in the back of the magazine, they had job listings. And I saw, I'm sorry, this was the next job.
Yeah.
From Albany, Georgia. Each week I would go to the library to read Broadcasting and Cable magazine because the subscription was too much for me to afford.
That's right.
And in the back of the magazine, they had job listings, and I saw one for Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for weekend meteorologist. Now, much like Albany, I had never lived in Milwaukee. I didn't know anyone there, but I applied for that job, and sure enough, I got the job and ended up working in Milwaukee, which was another awesome opportunity at WTMJ in Milwaukee. I was there for 4.5 years. I grew a lot as a person because I was in my mid-20s. And I tell young people now that's when you're probably, well, we're all dating, but some people are more thinking about long-term relationships. So I dated and I got to the point where it wasn't working. Whether it was women who had unrealistic expectations or, well, actually, that was probably most of it. But fortunately, I met my wife in Milwaukee. So that's the best part of Milwaukee, which, of course, we were married more than 30 years ago. Still strong marriage. And that's key for success. Yeah. Is that balance between personal life and job life. My wife was an engineer, TV engineer at one of the other stations. So we had mutual friends. And then I learned this thing, which I tell young people now, first off, is you can be the best employee, you can have the highest ratings, but when you get a new boss who decides they want to save money or hire someone else, your career changes and you have no control over it. And a lot of times you don't see it coming. So that's what happened to me in Milwaukee. I learned about job politics. And the new boss came in after 4.5 years. We were just married. And he said, he offered me a salary reduction. He offered me a salary reduction.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And of course, I was shocked and thrown off. I didn't know such a thing was possible. I quickly declined. My wife supported that because she knew and I knew that I was pretty marketable. And I had been applying for jobs for a year and a half, coming up to that point in my contract in Milwaukee. And fortunately, one of those jobs was in Chicago. And when I had applied a year earlier, the news director said, we don't have an opening, but send me something in 6 months, a year from now. And I did. And that was WGN in Chicago, where the news director hired me. And 2 weeks later, I was working in Chicago at WGN. So in that regard, my career was really good. There was no downtime. I went from the 151st market to the 32nd market to the 3rd market.
Yep. Nice.
I was still working with Tom Skilling. I was still weekend meteorologist, which that part I wanted more because all of us, we want to study weather 5 days a week, not just 2 or 3 days a week. So I was a permanent employee at WGN, but I was a part-time employee. And that opened up so many doors. I became chapter president of the AMS in Chicago, which was, again, people asked me because they knew I was working part-time. And when I went to the archives and looked at some of the other presidents of that chapter in Chicago, Ted Fujita, Rossby, all these big names. And to me, it was just mind blowing that now my name was in that same category with these giants in the field who we all read about and learned their theories. So also in Chicago at that same time, I started doing some independent projects. This was the mid 90s. And one of the most rewarding ones was an independent video producer wanted me to host a kid's video on lightning. And I did. And it was sold by a local company in Chicago called United Learning. Back then, it was a VHS tape. And United Learning distributed their videos to K through 12 schools around the country. So I did the video for him. And I looked at the quality of it when it was done. And I'm thinking, this is really not that good. I can do better. And fortunately, at that same time, my wife had started doing her own video production business. Nonlinear video desktop editing had just come into play, and digital cameras the prices had come way down to the point that we bought our own equipment, and I was able to create my own video. And I started with one. It was on severe weather safety. And I took it to the company when I was done, and they liked it, and they added it to their catalog. And from that video, I made, it's like writing a small book. You get royalties. You get paid every quarter from a percentage of what they license it for to educational outlets.
Right.
So that was the mid 90s. And from there, once I saw the quarterly checks, I'm thinking, boy, I have a lot of time. I can do more of these. So I ended up, over the next 5 years, I ended up doing like another 15 videos for K through 12. And I did one for little kids in particular, which I like. But from that, so I had two, the phrase now is revenue streams.
That's
I
right.
had a part-time job, but I also had the videos. And I still have the videos. And now my catalog is up to, it's about 100 videos since the mid 90s. And what made it even better was that company was bought out by Discovery Education, which is the folks who are associated with the Discovery Channel. So now my videos are seen around the world, internationally, and they're in different languages. One of the cool things years ago is one of my friends from growing up, he was excited. He called me, said, my son just brought his homework home and your name is on it. So his kid's school was using my videos. So that's been really rewarding to create something that's healthy and positive and gets kids excited. And then, of course, pays me money, which is part of why I was able to retire a little earlier than most people.
but there's a sort of a pride in the ownership of knowing, and that's a legacy that's going to always be out there. So that's pretty cool. Really love it. Yep. And I know Chicago wasn't your final spot in the career arc.
No, it wasn't. I was kind of hoping it would be, but after getting married and getting into my early and mid 30s, most of us see life differently. And as exciting as Chicago was as a city, as many things as there were to do, in big cities, you deal with traffic, air quality, cost of living, which is not bad. But once again, job politics came up. WGN, I had a new news director come in. And at first, she said, you have a good future here. And then probably 6 months later, she said, you can stay or you can leave. Literally, that was what she told me. And I ended up staying. She ended up being fired because she was a really bad manager. But I could tell I had no future there. I could tell, as we have seen, that Tom Skilling would not retire for decades, so there was no upward mobility. And along the way, another colleague at the NBC station, Andy Avalos, meteorologist, he talked to his GM about hiring me, and they hired me as the web producer. This was just when TV stations were getting websites together, and we were getting into wireless communication in the mid 90s. So I ended up going to the NBC station in Chicago for a year, until they hired this gentleman by the name of Jerry Springer. So that was the station that hired Jerry Springer to do commentary on the 10 o'clock news. And needless to say, it didn't work out. I still to this day don't know whether that decision was made in Chicago, whether it was made in New York, because it was an NBC-owned station.
Yeah.
But all the managers were fired and half the staff was let go.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And my contract was up at that time, and I was let go. And I knew it was coming, and I was okay with it because I realized I didn't want to work in that kind of environment.
Mm.
So after that, and this was now into the late 90s, I went 6 months, 8 months without working, or at least working on TV. I was still doing my videos.
Right.
A friend, same story. A friend had asked me to teach the intro meteorology course at Columbia College in Chicago. So I was doing that, which was a lot of fun. I was writing for one of the local newspapers every other week or every week, I think. So I was staying busy. And then finally, so this was, now we're into 1999, when Florida started, the hurricane season was really active that year. So in the midst of my downtime, I ended up freelancing in Florida, Central Florida News, which is, I believe it's now the Spectrum station in Orlando.
Right. Yeah.
So I spent a couple of weeks there dealing with the hurricanes, which was a lot of fun because to that point, I had never done tropical meteorology, even though I went to FSU. And then finally, toward the end of the summer, I got the call from WKRG in Mobile. And they offered me a chief meteorologist position. So this was the first time I had been offered a chief position. And I wasn't excited about Mobile because I didn't know much about it.
Right.
I did my research. It turned out, because I'm still here 25 years later, it turned out to be the best place to be.
Wow.
My wife and I figured, oh, we'll do one contract and move on. But one after the other. The people are genuine. The weather is challenging. Seafood is great. Cost of living is awesome. And that station that hired me originally, at that point in 1999, they had just bought their own Doppler radar, which was the big deal back in the 90s. They had a leased helicopter. So it was when weather was really being pushed as something people needed to know. And when they started giving the titles chief meteorologist versus just weatherman or weather person. So that was good. I ended up at that station for almost 20 years, which was probably 6 or 7 contracts. And then I got to the point where things needed to change for me to be happy. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the overall environment of the station. And really, I was treated fine, but a lot of my coworkers weren't happy in their positions. And as much as people would say, oh, you're making great money, I'm thinking, but my environment is not one that's promoting excellence and happiness, which was important to me. So on my final contract in 2019, we couldn't get close enough together to make it worth sticking it out.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had enough skills and enough cushion with my videos and so forth that I could leave. So I ended up leaving. at the end of that contract at the very last minute. And it was a big shock to the community, which is, it's rewarding. You know, I hate to see people who are sad, but most people know in all jobs and all careers, you have to make moves from time to time that are, it's just the way life goes. So 2 weeks after that, I got interviewed with the other local stations. They said, "Oh, so we hear you're single now, so maybe we can work something out." And they both made good offers, and I ended up choosing the NBC station here in Mobile, and I ended up staying there for 4 years as chief meteorologist.
Right.
So that is the short version. I left out a lot of little things, but that's
Oh, no. I think, first of all, it's a testament to your ability to have these other interests and these other parts of your life that are passions, but also are profitable. And
yes.
so you have some wiggle room and some leverage when it comes to, you know what, this isn't working out, I'm going to go do something different. And I think I think a lot of people who are just starting out in this particular business in broadcast meteorology would take great advice from that. Put it in your back pocket and go, you know what, I'll do this, but I think I also need to kind of look at something else and have a couple of different, as you put it, revenue streams, you know, or things to sort of lean back on in case a crisis happens, like obviously everybody's let go at one time kind of thing.
Right.
That happened for me in the Tampa Bay market, where everybody in the newsroom was, all right, this is our last broadcast, you know, good luck, that kind of thing. So getting to the Gulf Coast, in that, definitely there are challenges there. You talked about tropical meteorology, and obviously Mobile Bay is the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And so whenever there is a hurricane in the Gulf, it's like everybody's hair just stands up, and some are like, oh, whatever. And then some are like, what's going to happen immediately? So, and you had to work through several major hurricanes in that time span. I think of Ivan,
Yes.
was probably one, but there are many others. Katrina, things that created havoc in Mobile Bay, but maybe didn't come directly into Mobile, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So challenging as a meteorologist, but as a resident of that community, how did you feel working, dealing with the stress of that, coming out on the other side with the community's rebuild and things like that? Talk about maybe one or two of the bigger storms that you had to work through, and how that was impacted you.
Yeah. So yes, Ivan and Katrina, those were the big two. Ivan was 2004, Katrina 2005. So I had been at the station for 4 years. With Ivan, throughout my career, once I got to Chicago, the other benefit of working part-time is I was able to go to weather conferences. So from the early 90s, I would go to the NWA, National Weather Association Conference. I would go to the AMS, American Meteorological Society Broadcast Conference. And then in the early 2000s, there were some other conferences like the Bahamas Weather Conference, which, yes, was a real conference for people who are curious about it. But that one in particular focused a lot on tropical meteorology. So you learn so much. Learning never stops. I tell people college teaches you how to learn, even though you'll learn the basics, but you really learn by doing and by listening to other people's examples. So by the time Ivan came around in 2004, I'd had a really good understanding of tropical meteorology, radar interpretation, the history of tropical weather in the region, and most importantly, how to communicate it to people. I think to this day, one of the biggest problems meteorologists have is we're so fascinated by the science that we forget other people are petrified, that they see a hurricane as a terrorist, something that potentially can destroy their homes and their lives.
Yeah.
So I've always put probably more emphasis on communicating weather than actually forecasting weather. Now, of course, I do forecasts, but if you can't make the weather make sense to the average person, then you're not doing your job. So Ivan allowed me to do that. And to this day, people remind me, they said, well, you were so calm, which that's my nature. I'm a calm person. Fear and panic don't help you. I mean, they can help you if a bear is attacking you, but in general, throughout life, those things just slow you down. They get in the way. But if you understand what's happening, where it's coming from, what it could do, you can better handle it as long as you plan in advance. But people will tell me, I said something that I had forgotten after Ivan. We lost electricity. And for some people, it was weeks with no electricity. This was just when cell phones were becoming pretty common in the general public. But people reminded me, I'd said that after Ivan, this is one of the few times you can go outside and see the Milky Way, if you live in Mobile, for example. And that's stuck with people. And other people tell me, well, after the storm, we had no electricity, but we were listening to you on the radio. And I remind people that cell phones are great, but radio is still a really important tool in a disaster because it's not controlled by bandwidth. And you don't need a cell phone tower to listen to the radio. But yeah, things like that, people just commented how comforted they were that I explained what was happening along with what they should do to prepare for it. And it was pretty much the same with Katrina, both of which were, I tell young people now, as meteorologists, we sit behind a computer, we look at the data, we analyze and dissect a storm. But until you look out the window and see what the storm does, you really don't grasp the impact of something like a hurricane.
Right.
And it was a huge societal impact, economic, life and death for many people. And from that, and even before that, back in the early 2000s, after I got to Mobile, and I still go to schools, but I would do school visits. And on average, I would go to like 30 schools a year just to talk about weather. And I'd speak at Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and churches. And I just love sharing weather, whether it's on a podcast or in person. So things like that have really helped my career because people see me as a human being. They know that they can trust me. Yeah. And from that, I get a lot of feedback on what we weather folks do wrong, especially when we're in front of the camera. And what we do wrong is we talk too much without listening to ourselves, and we never tell people the actual weather. We tell them why things are happening, but we always forget to say, oh, by the way, it is going to rain tomorrow.
Perfect point. Yep. Man. One thing I wrote down, and I was looking at it a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, it's the anniversary, just past the anniversary of Hurricane Michael, October 10th. And so I was looking at some of the notes that I wrote down, and the one note that sort of stuck out was not from the 11th, but the night of the 12th, because I lived in a neighborhood that was all live oak trees. Just that's what it was known for with the live oaks. And so they were either down or completely stripped of their leaves after this hurricane. But what I noticed was the stars that night, just crystal, because there's no power, there's no light pollution. So it's the hum of generators and crystal clear skies where you could see every star.
And it was the smell of pine trees.
It was surreal. We have a friend who's a meteorologist that I spoke with. His podcast came out earlier in the week about this. He used the word surreal. What the life impact of storms like that, because my brother lives in an area between Panama City and Mobile in the Florida Panhandle and had no impact from Michael. And you drive 20 miles, 25 miles to the east, and it's utter devastation. And I think you see what these storms have recently done, like Helene or Milton, and there's this wide swath of damage from one state to the next. And for the people who are in it, they don't see the rest of it because you lose power, you lose communication. Cell phone towers go down. And so you're right. It is up to the communicators like yourself and others to kind of tell the other parts of the story. And for me, it was like, keep the story going, because those folks, like in Katrina, or with Ivan, or with Michael, or now Helene and Milton, they don't want to be forgotten.
Right.
The story needs to be continue to be told, which is unfortunate, because the news cycle it's time to cycle out.
Yep, it is. I always two other things I would always do, and still do to this point, is whether it's a tornado threat or a hurricane threat, I start with people that I tell them, we're going to get through this.
Mhm.
Most of the time, most of us are not going to feel the worst of whatever this is, but you still have to plan for the worst. And if you plan, most of the time you're going to do okay. You may take a financial hit, you may get your house messed up, but
Yeah.
you will be okay if you plan.
Yeah, the planning part, and so that's a really important piece along the Gulf Coast, and you do it year upon year upon year. And for Florida, there was like this 11-year stretch where there were no
Right.
hurricane landfalls, and so until Ivan, and then from Ivan until Hermine, is
Hmm.
what I meant to say. Um, so there's a sense of complacency, and you come in, here's the month of May, and everybody's making their plans and get your kits together and get your water, and a hurricane season goes by and you never use it.
Hmm.
But as communicators and educators, because you want to educate people about the potential impact, um, to I think the point about telling them, we're going to get through this, here's what we're going to have, here's what we're going to experience, is a vital role as a communicator, and that communication part of it,
Hmm.
um, to talk to your viewer. And I know from watching you from afar and watching your videos, that that is the one, you know, I, I get, I pull that from you, and I try to use that, if you will, to say, okay, he's calm here.
Hmm.
He is bringing the level down just a little bit as far as the hype, but he's bringing the level up with, this is important.
Hmm.
And because sometimes you can get really stirred up
Right.
and start screaming at people, which is, and so I kind of, in all transparency here, I look at you and how you work and go, you know what, I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to
Thank you.
try to do that. Um, so so we've gotten to a point now. You're through with, you've retired from television.
Hmm.
You have a lot of side projects.
Yeah.
One thing I know about, though, is your writing.
Hmm.
And if you could spend a little bit of time here talking about those different projects and what it meant to you to get some of that into a published book.
Yeah. I've always, growing up, I love to read and I love to write. I still love to read. I just have a harder time doing it now because life's distractions get in the way. Uh, and whenever I have thoughts, um, which fortunately are mostly positive, I write them down because I don't like things accumulating in my head. And then it's like anything else, blowing up a balloon. You're afraid you're going to explode. So I've always written, and whether it's been for newspaper or the kids who would write back in the days when kids wrote letters to you, I would write a response. And now, of course, it's digital. You write a response. But during the pandemic, I realized that I had written so much stuff and fortunately had digital copies of it.
Mm,
Um, and up until that point, I had never really planned to write a book. Now, I did always want to do a weather photography book. So I did start that project about 10 years ago. And then finally, during the pandemic, I said, okay, let me just go ahead and do this. Um, so during the pandemic, I realized that I had just what we're doing now. It's here's my career, here are the lessons I've learned, here's how I got into it. Uh, and really geared toward young people looking at any profession. How do you apply for a job? How do you interview?
mm,
Um, what are the hours? What's the pay like? What are the obstacles? So that was And I guess as you know, we walk into a store and people ask us the same questions over and over. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? How'd you get here? What was the worst storm you ever dealt with? So I just really took all those questions that people asked me, whether they were personal questions or meteorology questions, and that's what my books are, the two written books. The photo book, and they're available on Amazon, and so is my photo book. The photo book is it's a celebration of weather, um, not just stormy weather. It's actually mostly pretty and unique weather, things that folks on the Gulf Coast don't see, like snow.
Hmm.
Um, but it does include lightning and water spouts. I tell kids all the time, I've never seen a tornado. And the reason why is whenever there's been one, I had to go to work. I had to be inside studying it on a radar rather than outside looking for it. And I also remind people that most people will never see a tornado. I try to break
Hmm.
that misconception that all tornadoes are going to destroy communities, where it's a really tiny percentage that are the really bad ones. Um, so yeah, the writing was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. Like most authors, I didn't and I don't expect to make a lot of money off of it, but I do hope it'll help people. I do hope people will
Hmm.
learn from it and grow from it. It'd be nice to make a lot of money off it one day, but my main goal was just to get it out there and share, and
Right.
just to share.
That's awesome. Well, we're definitely when the podcast is done, and we'll link all of those links so people will have access to find those publications.
Yeah,
The photographic images are spectacular
thank you.
in those. You know, everybody sort of goes out, takes pictures with their phones, which is great. But to the cinematography, not necessarily with video, but just in that capturing that from a photographic moment. Some of the images are fantastic. I follow a fellow on social media who's a photographer down in Central Florida,
Hmm.
and mostly he does a lot of weather pictures, a lot of lightning pictures,
Mm.
but also he takes a lot of pictures of just birds in the Tampa Bay area, and the imagery is just it's unbelievable.
Hmm.
Moments that you miss when you're just life passes you by, that he stops, grabs it with a photograph, and you go, "Oh, okay." And there's so much art in that. So, and
Right.
I see the beauty in it, whether it's a
Hmm.
lightning bolt or not. You can pull the beauty out of it.
Right.
Got a few minutes here just to kind of to finish up. I could go on for a long, long time, but I know you. I don't want to take up too much more of your
No,
day.
I'm good. I'm half retired.
Well, I don't want to keep you from the lawn care anyway. Um,
Yeah.
let so if you at this stage of your life and your career, and you kind of touched on a few of these things early on, but say there is a fresh out of college Alan Seals talking to you right
Hmm.
now, what would be a word? What would you go and maybe just a sentence say, hey, be ready for this, or why don't you do these things to get you ready for life? How would you mentor yourself right out of college?
Yeah, I'd say be flexible, be practical, be realistic. Um, right out of college, the career is the first thing on your radar. But know that life is going to get in the way. And at the end of the day, money aside, life is more important than the career. You've
Mm,
got to be a happy person to be a happy professional. You can't just be a happy professional and have a miserable life. So there, there is a balance, but be realistic on where that balance is.
that's an awesome point. Yeah, uh, the quote that I always fall back on: you either live where you work, where you work where you live. And
Right.
so if you found a place you want to live, then go find a job. But if you found a job, wind up living there, meaning find your
Hmm.
church, find your people, find your tribe, I think is now the the buzzword, and live there. And I think that's really important advice to give a younger person who's just 10 foot tall and bulletproof and think nothing's going to happen, because life gets messy. And things can come up, like we had mentioned. So that's salient advice, I think.
And something else hit me, which I do tell people, young people. I won't say the name of the company, but there was a series of commercials where the tagline was "Just okay is not okay," and for any professional, just okay is not okay. You've got to be sharp at what you do. And what we do as meteorologists, it is life and death sometimes.
Yeah.
And even if it's not life and death, it could be people losing hundreds or thousands of dollars of an investment because the weather turned out to be something other than what you predicted, which that happens, but you have to tell people there's a probability that this may happen. So yeah, don't underestimate how critical it is to know stuff. Don't fall on Chat GPT to answer your questions. You have to know. You're the professional.
Yeah.
And I've always approached what we do as a mechanic or a doctor. You have to take people by the hand. You have to walk them through it. But most importantly, you have to know what you're doing. You can't fake it.
That's right. Awesome. Very, very well said. Very well put. I know we talked about a few of the things you're doing right now, and we mentioned your books. If they just Amazon search for you, they'll find those publications, or do you have the? We'll have links to those in our show notes, as
Correct.
we have now figured out what I'm supposed to do with those. But anything else on the horizon for you, or you're just sort of steady state in the semi-retirement life?
No, I'm trying to do less, but every time I try to do less, someone says, "Hey, do you want to do this, or you want to help out over there?" So I'm enjoying the balance of doing little projects here and there, even with the weather consulting. It's just enough to keep me excited, but not enough to wear me down to where I have to wake up and say, "Oh, I have to do this today." So I'm enjoying where I am. Just a little bit of everything, little travel, still doing the photography.
There you go. I think I'll title this episode "Enjoying the Balance." That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wrap it up right there, Alan. I am so proud of having you on the podcast project, as I said, I just love your work, and I appreciate you as an older friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I wish you nothing but the best.
And actually, that's the last point. Friendship over decades is critical to a healthy life and career. So keep that going.
All right. Well, we will end it right there. Thank you so much again. Have a great day and enjoy the holidays coming up.
All right.